Hey everyone, back for another episode, still diving into chapter 3, subheading for today, the purpose of the law. Let's take a look at it.
You are watching the Beyond Sunday podcast.
All right, everybody, this is the next to last subheading in Galatians chapter 3, and here we go, the purpose of the law, beginning in verse 19. What purpose, then, does the law serve? Good question. It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. And it was appointed through angels by the hand of a mediator. Now, a mediator does not mediate for one only, but God is one. Is the law then against the promises of God? Certainly not. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, truly righteousness would have been by the law. But the Scripture has confined all under sin, that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. But before faith came, we were kept under guard by the law, kept for the faith which would afterward be revealed. Therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. Cool section, y'all. I am excited for this. The law, what is it good for? So we've been hinting around, Paul's been going back and forth, hey, the law doesn't do it. We're under a curse if we try to follow the law. So it starts to seem as we're reading these earlier sections, well, the law is fruitless. The law is no good. The law is bad stuff, man. Just give us the covenant, the promise, we're all good. But Paul says, hang on, everybody, hang on. We actually need to unpack this. There is some good in the law. There's a purpose to this. And he says, if the promise was good, which it is, and I think he's outlined that case quite well for us. If the promise is good, then what is the deal with the law? Fair question. 2 reasons, he says. First, due to transgressions. That's going to be the first reason for the law. He says, what the purpose of the law is that we have these transgressions, and it shows us that we are in transgression. And I think it's important for us to remember, it puts up some guardrails for us. It gives us some boundary lines, because with the law, what we see is, we're used to hearing phrases like, thou shalt not this, and, thou shalt do this. And those sound like all these restrictive things, but they're very much like guardrails. I don't know if you've really thought about this, but if you're ever on, kind of a mountaintop road, and you're going around these places where there are these sheer drop-offs, kind of on that edge of the road, driven up in some mountain areas before. Those are kind of nerve-wracking and stuff, especially if I don't know if you've ever been on one without a guardrail. Really hair-raising. I mean, you feel like you're really on point all the time. You don't know whether you're safe or not. Oh, is my tire kind of leaning in the shoulder? It's on slippery ground. I don't know. Guardrails are these clear visual indicators that say, this is the end. I know you're on the road right now, but where that guardrail is, road isn't over there. On the other side of that guardrail is nothing but danger. And so when you think about it, it's kind of weird. I remember reading years ago, somebody had a sermon illustration on guardrails. And guardrails, to be really effective, they're kind of closer, it feels like, than they need to be. You go, well, I could probably go over towards the edge a little bit farther. Well, yeah, you probably could. But a guardrail's placed to give you a margin of safety. And a guardrail's kind of a rough barrier. I mean, if you ever hit one with your car, it is going to jack your car right up. But when the alternative is hitting a guardrail because you were inattentive or not driving very well, and you suffer that damage as opposed to going off, say, the cliff and ending up in a big ball of fire at the bottom of the mountain, Well, I'd take the guardrail every single day of the week. So the guardrail provides these kind of boundaries. And in a way, if you'll allow the illustration, Paul's saying that, the law is there to help put up some of those guardrails. Because God understands how we are. He understands the transgressions, the sin in our life. He understands kind of those places where we're going to cross that line, where we're going to monkey some things up. And so God's saying, I'm going to put some boundaries up for you guys because I know these things will harm you. And in your heart and soul, you're probably in your sinfulness going to end up leaning into these things. So in the law, I'm going to tell you these things are out of bounds. And that there's a penalty to pay for those things. Because they're against righteousness. They're against holiness, absolutely. But you'll feel like they're restrictive and going, really, Lord? I mean, did you have? Yeah. Because what I want is absolute holiness for you. And more than anything, I want to keep you safe. And so I'm putting up these guardrails here. And it's going to show you what a true standard of holiness is. Like we've talked about in previous episodes, it's 100% standard. And so God doesn't compromise on these things. He doesn't say, I'll allow these things to slip, but these things I'm going to take serious. No. The law says, here's the transgression. This is a standard of holiness, and I want to show you the way to live. And you're going to look at it and go, who could follow something like that so perfectly? Well, that's going to kind of be the point. And he's trying to demonstrate that to us. And he said, I've created the law. And Paul's argument here is this: till the seed, and again, we've talked about that before, that seed, that singular seed, that's Jesus, till the seed comes. So I've given you the law as this placeholder. I'm building in a type, a shadow, an example for you. So, I mean, is the law Jesus? No. Is the law the same as the promise? No. I'm trying to show you something, though. This is a measure for us to begin working with. It's something that we can grow with. It's something that begins to create an illustration. It's like a metaphor, an example. Like if I was trying to tell you an allegory or a story to help illustrate a point, a lot of times that can be helpful because I may be trying to explain a higher point and you go, I'm not following you. Well, it's like this. And, then you get the illustration. Well, in some ways, think about this. The measure of holiness, the perfection of Christ. I mean, if you had never thought of it, never heard of it, how unfathomable, just unimaginable would that be? It's such a big gap from our natural sinfulness to where Jesus is. And so God was working through a people, doing something in them and saying, I'm going to start working with you. I want to build something in you. And I'm going to start planting this seed and showing you what holiness looks like. I want to show you what kingdom life is like. And I'm going to give you this example until the time of fullness. There's going to be a day when I've worked enough in you, where I've built enough foundation, I've built enough groundwork, there's been enough example, and you're going, I see where you're going. I see that. And you see enough examples, especially when we start getting into the atonement and the sacrifice and sin, and we start seeing these things working out through the people of God. There's a penalty for sin. They understand these are transgressions. This is holiness. There's a cost for transgressions. So they see these transactions beginning to happen. There is a standard of holiness in life, and there are transgressions that occur. We see our rebelliousness played out, especially in the 40 years wandering through the desert. God's working all these things in his people. He's doing all this stuff, and he's building something up. He's building an ethnic, a people, a memory, a culture in people that says, we get this thing. Now, we don't know the fullness of it yet, but we are a people who understand this, and that's where the law starts coming in. It's not only because of our transgressions, but because of the fact God's working something. He's building something up. He's creating this foundation so that when the fullness comes, that we're going to have seen the groundwork laid, and we're going to go, this is that thing. Yes, I see that. So when Jesus does arrive, we get the fullness in there. And that's why over in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, Jesus himself, so we're in the discourse known as the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says himself, these are his words, he said that he came to fulfill the law. So talking to a Jewish people, talking to an audience that totally groks the law, we get it. We've lived under it. We are the people of the law. It's what sets us apart from the rest of the world. That Jesus is saying, by the way, so all of that, yeah, we get that. Yeah, there's transgression and there's sin, and yet there's holiness, and because we've transgressed, there's a price to pay so that holiness can be received and there can be atonement for that. Yeah, we get that, Jesus. He says, I came to fulfill all that. Boom. So the law was there doing something and showing something and preparing the way. And then Paul begins to talk about, this idea of this of a mediator, and he adds in the fact that, as we're talking about the law, he says, by the way, there's a mediator, that the law was given through Moses, that God had to say, hey, to interface between me and the people, I need you to be kind of my liaison, my mediator. I need you to be kind of a go-between between the people and me. Make this connection for me. But it's interesting. It says in a covenant, there's no need for a mediator, because with the law, again, like we were talking contracts and things like that, if you've ever done kind of legal agreements and things, you and I as just two people very rarely can just do something legally. People are very hesitant. They're afraid. What if I mess this up, or there's a nuance and it's going to cause harm later? So we have a mediator, and that's where we end up with lawyers that stand in the gap between us, people who are experts on these things, that interpret from each side, make sure that each side is protected, make sure that each side fulfills their part. And so Paul's talking about the fact that, by the way, a mediator in this case is the person who's that go-between. They're making sure that the law, the contract, is all going through. But in a covenant, he says, there's no need. It's one-sided. God's saying, I've got the whole thing covered. I've made a promise. The arrangement is all on me, by the way. He says, I will accept you by faith. I've set the standard for righteousness, and I'm going to cover it. I understand what the standard of right living is, and I'm going to uphold it. The only thing you have to do is receive it. So you don't have to have a mediator to navigate terms. All you have to have is someone who proclaims the covenant and the promise, which God himself does, which God made that promise directly to Abraham. And all you have to have is somebody receiving it. So you don't need that lawyer in the middle. You don't have to have the mediator. And that's what Paul's kind of drawing out. We don't need somebody as a go-between between us and God anymore. We have the covenant promise. So what we have now is, in a sense, though, that the law is good, but the law and the promise are at war, maybe? No. That's not the case. They're not fighting against each other. It could seem like that. It's like, oh, well, boo on the law. The law's no good. The promise is the right way to go, so the law can stuff itself in its hat, and we don't need that anymore. It's not competition between the two. That's not what's going on here. It's about need and fulfillment. The law shows need. The law says, see, there's a need for holiness, because that's the only acceptable standard to God, and you guys aren't doing it, so let me show you how the gap looks. This is how serious the gap is. There is holiness, and I want it that way. That's the only way I'll take it. Here's the gap. And the promise, though, says, and I can fulfill that gap. Man, that's such good stuff. Here is this, from our seat, from our perspective, unfulfillable. I can't meet these needs. I can't cross that boundary. I can't balance the scales enough like we've talked about before. It's like a bucket I'm trying to fill up, but it's full of holes. I can't ever pour the water in fast enough to make it level and bring it to fullness. I can't do that. I don't have the strength, the power, the steadfastness. I can't do any of those things. So with the law, what we have is a need, a bucket that needs to be full, if you'll let me use that example. And the promise isn't competing with it. It is literally the means to fulfill that need. But we still have to see that the law doesn't give life, though. What the law does for us, like I said before, it's pointing out transgression. What the law is doing, it doesn't give life. It shows that we've lost real life. That's the thing. It's showing us what we've lost. It has this clear demonstration that says, this is what righteousness is. This is what whole life, if we go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, we see there was life in the garden, and then there was fall, and we were separated from life, and sin enters. There's those transgressions. Sin enters, and with sin, death enters. So we see that life was lost, and what the law does is the law isn't life-affirming. It isn't life-giving like the promise, like new life in Christ. Galatians 2:20, like we talked about before, is that it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. There's real life. It's not that. The law can't give that. But the law shows us, and it's pointing towards us. It is a demonstrator that says you lost real life. Through transgression, when sin entered, we lost real life, and that's its value. If the law could give life, it would make us righteous. If it could. If we could get real life, again, that Galatians 2:20, that we have new life in Christ, if the law and following the law could give life, then we would find that righteousness. But we've already talked about it. It doesn't. I can't follow it well enough. I can't do enough stuff. It lays out a standard of holy, righteous living. That's what the law does. And it says we should keep it. And it says there are consequences. The law is good. There's nothing in the law that you go, well, that's dumb. Throw that part out. That's silly. I don't know why God added that. The law is good. The law is holy. It's trying to show us something. And it says there are consequences when we don't follow after it. But just because it doesn't make us righteous doesn't mean it's not useful. It is. It is such a great teacher. The law actually, we have to remember, though, it has a confining power on us. And because Paul doesn't want to get to a point where he's saying, oh, the law is so good. I don't know what I was saying earlier. Go ahead and follow the law. Let's add all this stuff in. No. He's saying the law confines us. It imprisons us. We're trapped by the law. Because even though it is good, even though it does show a path of righteousness, and there's, Jesus came to fulfill that law, that as we try and live under it, it is a yoke. It is a heavy yoke that ties us down. It imprisons us. It sounds a bit harsh, but it tells us the truth that sin is being brought to reality by the law. That we're fully aware of what sin looks like because God clearly defines it in the law. We may have in our conscience, in the, C.S. Lewis calls it the moral law pushing down on us, that we can feel like, I'm being a bit shady today. Some of my behaviors are off center. I know that what I'm doing is not good. So as our conscience, as the moral law weighs on us, we may have those things, but we can't argue once we encounter the law. And we may be able to justify or rationalize our behavior and kind of give ourselves a pass on occasion. But when confronted directly with the law, there's no more arguing. What I'm doing is out of alignment with God's desires. I am no longer in righteousness. And so it points the truth out about sin in our life. It brings it into reality. And because of that, we're we're trapped, we're imprisoned by that. And the law can be a firm taskmaster. And before faith in Christ, it's important for us to know we were all imprisoned by the law. Like I said, it's a 100% standard. We either meet it or we don't. And so before Christ, we were all stuck in that position of saying, I'm trying to meet the law. I can't meet the law, and I can never tip the scales right. The only thing I can do is seek that earthly atonement. And that's where the people of Israel were for so long. Thankfully, for all of us that would be listening to this, we are in the day and age after the new covenant, and so we've not had to carry those burdens. But that was a reality of the people. And the audience that Paul is talking to, that was something that they were, that's still a fresh struggle. They're still trying to work through these things. And so very impassionately, he's trying to get them to come to grips with this understanding. And he shows them that the law has a purpose. The law was, and I really like these words here. He says that the law was a tutor. And a tutor is somebody who instructs children, helps them grow. And a tutor's more than just, like we might think today of like a math tutor. It's like, help me out with my geometry. I was awful at geometry. I could do math until you add shapes. Somehow those don't work together for me. But you're in the middle of this, and, we might think of a tutor, somebody helps you with this nuance of something. Tutor in this context, far deeper of a relationship. As they instruct the children, they would instruct them in knowledge and behavior. At certain stages, they may serve as, almost a guardian over the kid, because they spend so much more time with the kid than even the parents do as they tutor them through those challenging years. And the tutor would be responsible for even disciplining the child, helping them grow into a solid citizen, if you will. And so here, what he's saying is the law is showing what sin was and how hard, in all actuality, parenthetically, how impossible righteousness was. You can read through it, you can know it, you can understand it, but as the tutor, the law is going to show you this is impossible to attain your own righteousness. Faith is possible. Faith is. As long as you have someone to place it on. If, so when you think about somebody who we put faith in, we believe in them and we think they can get something done for us. And even in our earthly relationships, how fragile we are as people, we can still see that play out. But here in this case, we have Christ, who we can put all of our faith in. And we know that he can absolutely fulfill all of this. The job that we can't get done, that bucket that leaks out that we need to get filled, he can do that. He can absolutely do that. And so faith makes that gap possible because we've got the right person now. We no longer have our old tutor who is showing us the impossibility of getting this done. We have somebody that we can place our hope and our faith in Jesus, and he can do this. So now we're not under a tutor. Just because we've outgrown the tutor, though, because Paul's saying we're no longer under a tutor, just because we've outgrown it doesn't mean we've chucked everything that we've learned. I think, I still give great value as I go and I read the Old Testament and you read the law. There's so much beauty in it. It's full of truth, and we learn from the law. We can remember so many lessons from it. There's the reality of sin. There's the burden of keeping the law. When you look at how the people of Israel had to live out their lives, if you start looking in the context, you start seeing the sacrificial system and the amount of sacrifice and atonement and sin offerings and things, because sin was so real in front of them. And the only way to find atonement was to actually make this interchange, this exchange with God. When we see that and we dive into the law and we read that, it is such a powerful reminder to our heart and soul of all that Christ did to set us free from that. And it reminds us of how deeply serious God takes our transgressions and what Jesus did that has set us free from all that. And as we study the law, it shows us the cost of not following it. And so, while we're not under that tutor anymore, We've learned our lessons. We've grown up. We're adults now. We don't live under that tutor, but hopefully we don't forget all the lessons that we learned. We go back, we look, we remember, and it's those foundations that help us build, but we don't live under that anymore. The law reminds us of who we are, and this is so important, how great the sacrifice of Christ is and how much it was needed. So there you go. That brings us to the end of that section. Big chunk there. I think that's such a cool area as we look at the fact, Paul's been saying, hey, we don't live under the law. It's not the law that saves. But I love the fact that he pauses and says, I'm not telling you to chuck this out. We're not burning the past. We're not tearing things down or sticking our fingers in our ear and pretending none of this is real. He says, I'm just calling you to something bigger than that. We'll remember all the past, but there's something so much better. And don't forget, that's our theme, is it's by faith. It is by grace we've been saved, and that's what we're aiming towards, and that's where we're going to keep going. Next time, we're going to actually finish up chapter 3 and bridge into the beginning of chapter 4. It's one of those subheadings that crosses a 2-chapter boundary, but we'll take a look at that next time. See you then. Take care.
This has been another episode of the Beyond Sunday podcast. And don't forget, like, share, and subscribe.